Good evening. It's so nice to see you all here this evening. Welcome to the 2025 Agnes, Lynch, Anderson, and Roger Anderson Lecture at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I'm Rachel McGarry, the Elizabeth Macmillan Chair and Curator of European Art. And I just want to thank you all for being here. It's been such a pleasure to have George Shackelford with us in Minneapolis. He arrived yesterday, and we've been having a lot of fun in the galleries and storage. But before I introduce our illustrious guest, I would like to tell you about a very special musical performance happening in the galleries at the close of this evening's lecture. Devon Tynes, an accomplished singer of opera, will be performing with his band, The Truth, premiering their new work, Ritual, which is presented in dialogue with Mia's Giants exhibition. So I hope you're all able to take some time after the lecture to experience this special performance. But we get to spend a lovely hour with Pierre Bonnard and George Shackelford. And as I was reviewing George's extraordinary CV and stack of hefty exhibition catalogs in my office before his talk tonight, I began to wonder who was the more accomplished human being, Pierre Bonnard, the great French painter, or the curatorial dynamo, George Shackelford? Seriously. George is the deputy director at the Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. Prior to his 13 years at the Kimbell, George was the Museum of Fine Arts. He was at the Museum of Fine Arts, where he chaired the Art of Europe department. And before that, he was curator of European painting and sculpture at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. To further polish this pedigree, I should mention that he earned his BA from Dartmouth College and PhD from Yale University. But these impressive degrees, titles, and institutions actually do not define George and his amazing accomplishments. And so I'd like to make note of three things that are very special about George that makes us all admire him. One, George has a remarkable eye and passion for 19th century art like few other. Looking at a work of art with George is such a delicious treat. With him as your guide, you will see a painting and drawing entirely anew, and he will make such a pleasure to look at together. Two, George's record in organizing beautiful, blockbuster, incredibly amazing exhibitions, and in publishing alongside these shows major hefty exhibition catalogs. There's Bonnard's World, Degas' Dancers, Monet's Late Years, Gauguin's Tahiti, and many, many more. George's exhibitions really bring to life, for both the public and the very nerdy scholars, which is hard to please both, fascinating worlds. And it's the Belle Epoque Paris, it's the life of Edgar Degas' ballerinas, it's Bonnard's country life and his motoring to Giverny to see his friend Monet, and so on. So the negotiations and the blood and sweat and tears that go into securing the precious loans for just one of these exhibitions would scare most curators off. But George's brains, charm, and energy work their magic, and he usually gets what he wants. And then he starts a project as soon as the last one opens. It's kind of incredible. And Mia is, in fact, very excited to be partnering with George and the Kimbell and the Berlin Neue National Gallery on a major exhibition opening in Minneapolis next March, Modern Art and Politics in Germany, 1910 to 1945, Masterworks from Berlin. And our own Tom Rascher is working closely with George on this powerful exhibition. So the last thing I want to say about our special guest before I turn over the microphone to him, is to make note of George's exceptional kindness and generosity. George is such a beloved colleague and mentor in the field, and by curators, directors, interns, graduate students. Tom, Galena, Katie, Matthew, we can all speak to this, and we each have our own stories about how he's helped and been so kind. So we all admire George for this, as he's made the art world a kinder and gentler place. So without much further ado, please help me give a warm welcome to George Shackelford.
I kind of don't know who that person was that Rachel was talking about. It is such a pleasure to be back in Minneapolis. It's the last time I was here was about 4 years ago, when I flew up for the day from Fort Worth to ask for the loan of one of your most beautiful works of art, and it is this one, Bonnard's Dining Room in the Country from 1913. Which I hope you know, and if you don't already know, I will tell you that it is one of Bonnard's most important paintings. And you are so lucky to have it here in Minneapolis. It was certainly it was at the very center of my exhibition, Bonnard's Worlds, in the fall of 2023 and early 2024 in Fort Worth, and everyone admired it. And it was in a section of the exhibition devoted to the idea of the window. And that is what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight, the idea of the window in Bonnard's art. But before we do that, let's look at this painting just for its own self a little bit, and think about the way the painting is put together. Just let's sort of read the painting a little bit, and why don't we start with a cat? Always a good place to start. This is my favorite cat of the two in this painting. I love the white eyes. It's kind of like a little ghost cat. Very much smaller than you would expect it for the size of that chair. Here's another one on the other side of the painting, on the other side of the table, sticking his or her nose over the table. I think the cats don't generally like fruit, so I doubt it's going to find something to eat. Above the cat, on the sort of sideboard, is a pitcher, a sort of ordinary faience pitcher with some poppies and wildflowers stuck into it. As you go up the wall, you notice a beautiful shadow cast by the door, the open door, which is being lit by beautiful light that's coming in from the garden. And the garden light comes in and it strikes the sort of right-hand edge of the door, casts a nice defined shadow on the panel under the windows, under the glass part of the door, which then disappears as the light gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer as it passes across the bottom of the door and becomes, if it starts at sort of yellow-green on one side, it ends blue-violet on the other. That light is coming from outside, where in the garden there's a little girl walking around, seems to be maybe plucking some flowers. In between is the window at which the window that sort of gives light into the dining room when the door is closed. At the top, its curtain is seen as a dark pattern of fabric. It's a lacy, machine-made curtain, not very fancy, seen as dark against light, whereas when you get down to the bottom, it's catching the light, and you see both its shadow at the left, its silhouette, and then the way it catches the light coming through the window on the right. At that window is a woman, and I will tell you right away that she is Marthe de Méligny. They're actually not yet married when this painting is made in 1913. They wouldn't end up marrying until 1925, but they've been together for 20 years by the time this painting is made. They meet in 1893, and this painting is painted 20 years later. Above her head is a view out into the garden and towards the Seine, which is at the end of their property in the background. So it really is a truly extraordinary painting, really beautifully composed. And it seems to show a rather elegant, spacious dining room. Plenty of room for chairs around the table, big windows and doors, and in point of fact, it was tiny. And here is Marthe seated in front of that open door. This is the very doorway into the dining room there. There's the window at which she would stand. To the left of this photograph, taken in the 20s sometime. That's their dog Black at her feet. This is before they had a penchant for dachshunds, of which they had some 7, each one of which was named Poussette. And this house is in the countryside in a little village or hamlet called Vernonnet, which is in a suburb of Vernon, which you can see vaguely in the distance in the background at the top left, on the River Seine, and the road that you see going into the distance here in this painting made in the 20s also is the road that divides the two halves of Monet's garden at Giverny, about 4 miles away. The red roof that you see just here, I think that's a pointer, there you go, here, that's the roof of their little house, which Bonnard called Ma roulotte, my caravan. And here's a painting of it. And here it is as it stands now. It's been somewhat altered. Somebody decided they wanted a plate glass window with a sliding door. But it's now been bought by the city of Vernon and will be turned into some kind of artist center over the course of the next several years. The balcony that you see in the photograph is still present. The brackets that held the balcony up originally have been replaced by posts. I'm sure they're stronger. And the roof has been extended above to cover a little bit more of the balcony. But how much they will return it to its original shape, I don't know. It was after Bonnard and his wife sold it in 1939, it was enlarged to make it livable because it was really just a succession of tiny rooms strung together. But they were living alone, so it was probably plenty for them. Bonnard always painted away from the motif. He never would have set this canvas up in the dining room to paint it. He would have remembered it. And on the basis of small drawings, usually very sketchy, this one is in your collection, sketchy little drawings like this one, kind of messy, he would elaborate the composition back in his studio, which was probably only one room away. He made a drawing of the pitcher and the flowers, and you get a sense of that, the shadow in that little squiggle above the flowers, the shadow that you're going to find on the wall cast by the door. Another drawing of the chair and the window. And then we see Marthe herself studied in this drawing, and behind her a tree that they must have planted, and of which Bonnard painted several independent portraits, which I think is really quite remarkable. This one probably in springtime. I think this one in the summertime, given the roses that are flowering in the foreground. Now, having talked a bit about your painting, which again I want to reiterate to you, it is truly a treasure of this institution, and I gather your most requested work of art for loans, which makes the fact that you entrusted it to us all the more an honor. Let's talk a little bit about Bonnard, who is born into a middle-class family. His father is a civil servant, and they are comfortably off, but by no means rich. They have a very big house, a very big, simple house, out in the countryside in the Dauphinois, which is an area of France not far from Grenoble in the southeast corner of France. And there he, his family, his father and mother, his sister, their cousins, the sister's husband, friends gathering, spend a lot of time in the summertime. And it's his home, really, when he's away from Paris. He continues to go there even after he meets Marthe, and though she is not necessarily invited on all of these trips. Here is his grandmother and his sister, one of the sister's children undoubtedly on the grandmother's lap. There were lots of these children, and they provided a lot of fodder for his art in the early days. There's a great photograph of him bathing with these little boys in this fountain, and that's his brother-in-law squatting on the rock in the center of the pool. He was very interested in Japanese art from the very beginning, and he was called amongst the Nabis, that group of symbolist artists of which he was one of the founding members. He was called the Nabi très japonais, the very Japanizing Nabi, the Japanese Nabi. And here's a Japanese print at the left and one of Bonnard's early lithographs at the right. This interest in Japan and Asian art spilled over into his painting, into his graphic art. This is a set of panels that made up a decoration or could have been linked together to make a folding screen. His first great professional success was with this poster for France Champagne, with this overflowing, bubbling glass of champagne that seems to be it's a little bit of the stop, little pot stop of champagne glasses. And there at the right, in black, is Marthe, whom he meets, we are told, on the street. And they meet as total strangers. They're not introduced by anybody. They simply meet on the street and in 1893, and they remain together until she dies in the early 1940s. She becomes really one of the centers of his life and his muse, along with a couple of other people that he was very fond of, Monsieur Natanson, for instance. But Marthe, from the time that they meet in the early 1890s, is a figure who becomes incredibly important to him and who is depicted again and again and again. This is her painted by Bonnard's friend Vuillard, who also painted the portrait of Bonnard that you see at the right here. So these two portraits of the couple made by their friend Vuillard in the 1890s. These extraordinary paintings of Marthe and of Bonnard, there he's standing at the right-hand side of the left-hand painting here. It's in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, called Man and Woman, and the Siesta in the museum in Melbourne, Australia, where not only woman but dog are asleep in their Paris apartment. These are all set in the apartment in Paris where they lived, and at this time around 1900. He often paints Marthe bathing or in the process of doing her toilette. And in this extraordinary painting called The Bathroom, which is in Brussels, painted about 1908, it's just one of the most beautiful of Bonnard's early scenes of Marthe as a bather. In the lower left-hand corner of the painting, you see a flat tub for bathing. This is what the French would call a tube, as opposed to a bathtub, which they would call a bain. So T-U-B and B-A-I-N are two separate kinds of bathing receptacles. This is one that doesn't have a drain. You have to carry it full of water and empty it out into a drain in the apartment building, maybe out in the hall or down the hall. And you bathe squatting in that flat, shallow tub with the pitcher that's at the right-hand side of the tub, some of the sponges that are in the sponge bag just above. And you do your daily washing at that basin that's sitting on the dressing table there. Here we've got another window. And in this case, the window is covered with lace curtains again. And it's reflected in the water in the tub. But notice how the reflection in the tub bears very little relationship to the way the window actually looks. It seems to be of another window altogether. I'll point out to you also that there are two mirrors in this painting, one over the dressing table, and another three-part mirror is hanging, like a barber's mirror, is hanging on the wall over the pink sofa. There you can see it above Marthe's head. And it was my friend Jean who, when looking at this painting with me in Fort Worth, figured out what's happening. And she is holding in her right hand a bottle of cologne, and actually the first title of this painting was Eau de Cologne. And with her left hand, which is placed between her breasts, she's squeezing the bulb of an atomizer. which you can barely see, a tiny little curving line that goes from the top of the bottle. And so she's actually spraying herself and kind of leaning into the fragrance. So it really is this incredibly intimate image of his lover at her morning ritual. As I said, she is this extraordinary figure in his life. And it's not surprising that she is linked again and again with one of his favorite motifs, and that is, in fact, the window. Let's go from 1913 back to 1900 and look at this interior. It's called the artist's studio. It's certainly just a room in an apartment. We know where the apartment is, but we don't know why Bonnard was there. There is no record of him renting a space on the Rue Tolosa, which is where the door of this apartment building must have been. Those of you who know Montmartre will remember the Rue des Abbesses, and this looks out down onto the Rue Tolosa, which you'll see in a minute, and the Rue des Abbesses. So it's right there, not very far from where Van Gogh lived at the time, but up on the hill. And it was a part of Paris that Bonnard frequented at the end of the 1890s and the early 20th century. He never lived very far from here. He always had apartments in this sort of bohemian and artistic side of Paris. He made a lithograph of the view outside the window, and you can see through the window, the closed window. The curtains have been parted so we can see through. And you can see what you see in the lithograph at the right, which is, first of all, a perfectly blank wall that's a flue wall with chimney pots at the top of it. You see them in the second window pane at the right-hand side of the window at the left-hand painting. And then you see the dormer windows and the mullioned windows below it. This is another painting that he made of this. And often in these paintings, you see him catching a little detail. Something's happening in that dormer window. One window is shut and shuttered, the other one wide open. In the lithograph, a woman is hanging out some laundry, or perhaps a rug or a bedspread over the balcony to dry or to air out. And it must have been very tempting to spy on your neighbors from rooms like these. Here's Bonnard at the left, and Vuillard at the right, painting the ever-present balconies and windows of the many, many, hundreds of apartment buildings that were being built in Paris from the middle years of the 19th century until the end of the century. This is the Rue Tolosa, and that lit-up shop in the center of the painting at the right is on the Rue des Abbesses. And so you see him looking down onto this very steep street, so steep that the entry to the house would have to be several steps up from the street as it plunges down. And here is a night view recently acquired by the Van Gogh Museum of that same site. You recognize the blank wall with the chimney pots at the top and the open windows and the dormer windows. And here it is in the daytime. Now, so you're seeing that Bonnard relishes a view from a window. He likes to use a window as a vantage point for making a picture of a place, or whether it's a town or a countryside. And in this series of paintings that I've showed you, which are all from a very short period of time, around 1900, or in this one, again, 1900, 1901, you see him looking down. In this case, he's moved into another apartment. This is one that he lived on for several years on the Rue de Douai. And it gives on to the Boulevard de Clichy, not very far from the Place de Clichy, which was one of the busiest intersections in all of Paris. And so at nighttime, he's looking down on it. The shops are lit up in the in a row behind the trees that are in full leaf. You see things like an omnibus being pulled by a white horse there. Look at the way the cast shadows from different street lamps, casting their shadows in opposite directions. Look at the one lit window in the shadowy wall of the building above the illuminated walls at the upper right-hand corner. And then the same view, different orientation for the painting, the same set of houses looking down on the street in the daytime and in the winter when there aren't any leaves on the trees. So everything is revealed. There's a man with balloons. There's a car going by. There's dogs chasing children. It's really an extraordinarily charming painting. And like unto a painting like this one, which is almost exactly the same date, by Camille Pissarro, the great old man of Impressionism, who in this painting from your own collection of the Boulevard de l'Opéra, the Avenue de l'Opéra, looking up the Avenue de l'Opéra towards the Opera, blocking the end of the street there at the left. And he's peering down onto horses and carriages, and in Bonnard's case, he loves to show an automobile, and you don't see that yet in Pissarro. Back inside on the Rue Tolosa, we also get the sense that a window is for a person to look out of, and as a kind of a place that you can stand to be within and look without. It's an interesting subject in the history of art. It goes back to the Renaissance. It, in fact, has something to do with the whole idea of the picture as a window opening onto another world. But Caspar David Friedrich paints this in the early 19th century. Adolf Menzel, also in Germany, an artist that I suspect Bonnard never ever heard of, paints this beautiful painting of an open window in Berlin. Edgar Degas paints a woman sitting in front of an open window in Paris. And maybe the most famous open window in art history these days is Caillebot's young man at the window, now at the Getty in Los Angeles, and in an exhibition about Caillebot painting men that is there now and will be in Chicago later on this year, where I urge you to go to see it. Maybe Galena, who is one of the world's experts on Caillebot, will lead a group down to see the exhibition there. But it's not only realist, naturalist artists like Caillebot or Degas, or Menzel for that matter, who are interested in sort of showing you the reality of a window that is possible in terms of considering the window as a motif. Think, for instance, of Odilon Redon, who in his lithograph paints a window as a kind of space of mystery, with bars across it almost like the bars of a prison, floating organisms in the dust mites sort of floating in the light cast by the window. And indeed, in the art of the Nabis, in Bonnard and Vuillard, and in, that's Vuillard at the right, and in Maurice Denis and Vuillard again, the open window becomes a subject that is repeated again and again. Maurice Denis at the left, note the barber's mirror at the upper left-hand corner, and Vuillard painting his mother standing at an open window reading by the light of the sun. And this is a subject that carries on in Bonnard's art and carries on in Vuillard's art for quite a length of time. Here's his mother again tending one of her pot plants and maybe spying on the neighbors. But it's not only naturalists and artists in the Nabi circle who are interested in this idea. It's also Matisse. And this painting, of one of two paintings of an open window at Collioure, this is not the famous one of that title. The famous one is in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. This is one that belonged to Bonnard. And he bought it from Matisse in 1911, and it was part of the reason why they became, from that time on, very close friends, admiring each other's art, following each other's progress. And this is a painting that Bonnard bought, in, as I said, in 1911 and kept with him until he died. It shares many ideas with his painting of the artist's studio at the left, though the appearance of the two paintings could hardly be more different. Bonnard's in a sort of darkened room with deep shadows in the corners at the left and right, a kind of a muted color palette, whereas Matisse's painting is painted on a bright white canvas that he lets show through his thinly scumbled brushwork. And it gives a sensation of sunlight, and it's painted, of course, in the south of France instead of in Paris, so the light is completely different. And it must have been extraordinarily appealing to Bonnard when he acquired it. As I said, he kept it for the rest of his life. He owns this painting when he paints your painting, by the way. He's bought this in 1911, and he paints your painting in 1913. Just saying. And the parallels between them are just too fun not to play with and not to show you. Here's a beautiful Bonnard at the right from the museum, at the left rather, from the Museum of Modern Art, painted in a rental house that they took one year in the town of Arcachon in southwest France on the sea. Marthe suffered, we think, probably from tuberculosis, and she was always looking for a cure that would make her feel better. She was a kind of low-level invalid for much of their life together. So they would go to Arcachon, where she could take the waters and bathe in the hot springs. Matisse is one of several versions of the piano lesson. This one is the one in the Barnes Foundation, and I love it because of the sort of effulgent green in the background, in the sense of there being an elegant garden outside the window. Note that Marthe is standing in Bonnard's picture at the far left. You barely see her. She's really, I wouldn't say she was marginalized, but she is at the margin of the painting. I would urge you always to look at the edges and the corners in Bonnard's painting. It's often very rewarding. Here are two paintings painted of windows overlooking the Mediterranean. At the left, Bonnard in early 1919. He and Marthe left Paris at the end of the First World War and spent the winter in Antibes, and they had a hotel room that looked out over the sea. You see it glistening in the background and the light of the sun falling on the balusters outside their window. The light comes in and creates this beautiful pattern of rectangles and circles on the table beneath the glassy window. At the right is Matisse, also in 1919, painting in Nice, and he goes in the middle of the war, in I think 1917. He goes and lives in Nice, and pretty much lives in Nice for the rest of his life. And so entranced is he by the light of the Mediterranean, which is so different from the light of Paris. It's not an Atlantic weather pattern at all. It's a Mediterranean weather pattern, and the sun is different, and the colors are different, and it's just far enough south that it's green much of the time, and very, very different from rainy, cold, gray Paris. We'll talk about this a little more. They love to flatten things in their pictures of windows. Bonnard at the left again, Matisse at the right. These two are a bit farther apart in date. And these two pretty close in date. The open window from the Phillips collection at the right by Bonnard, and the second version, the more abstract version of the piano lesson from the Museum of Modern Art, where that effulgent garden has become a series of gray and green triangles juxtaposed with each other. So I wanted to explore a little bit also the function of the window as a kind of threshold. A window doesn't have a threshold like a door, but it has a sill. And in some cases, in Bonnard's case, a window can also be a door, or a door a window. Here in this magnificent painting from the Phillips collection, which is on the cover of my catalog, Bonnard's Worlds, your painting would have been on the cover of the catalog, but for the fact that the Phillips collection did not get off their you-know-what to come ask you for it properly. So they didn't get it, so we couldn't put it on the front cover of the catalog. But this is a beautiful painting. There's nothing wrong with this painting at all. It's really an exceptionally beautiful picture. And so this really beautiful image is one in which you sense the interrelationship or the play back and forth between inside and outside. The inside with its structure, with its geometries, the outside very much more organic and fluid. And this is true in many of Bonnard's images of windows, where there's a kind of geometric sophistication to the interior, and a looseness and a sense of plant life and motion and a kind of natural beauty of the landscape beyond. That's certainly true also in the dining room in the country, where the interior is so much more structured than the garden beyond. And indeed, if you were to go outside and you went up the steps that you see at the lower left-hand corner of the photograph, just here, you would arrive on the terrace that was at the upper level of Bonnard's house. This balcony wrapped around and became the fence on this terrace, which looked out across the Seine onto this wild garden. This painting, which was completed in 1919, just after World War II was over, called the Wild Garden originally, now just called the Terrace. And you recognize the continuation of that white fence in kind of what we used to call Chinese Chippendale style, wrapping around the balcony and onto the edge of the terrace. So it defines, it's a kind of windowsill threshold, it defines the space between that which is ordered in the foreground and that which is wild in the background. And it's a kind of an idea that Bonnard explores again and again. Here the door becomes a kind of window with the people out in the sunshine. Or here you get the sense that we're at a closed window and we're looking through both sides of the glass on either side of the central closure of a double window in a Paris apartment. This on the Boulevard des Batignolles. We know where this is located. Or here, in this magnificent, very large view of Bonnard's studio in Le Canet, at his last house, which is an extraordinary view where the parallelogram of the window becomes alive with this brilliant yellow color, which seems to, in fact, spill into the canvas and into the room and lights up the features of a kind of ghostly figure here in that, I told you to look in the corner, just down there. This notion of the threshold between inside and outside, between control and abandon, that you find in your painting also is found in this painting called Before Noon, or Morning, basically, where we stand inside the dining room of the house at Le Canet and look out. And it's only a few details, like the pink stripe at the left, that give us the sense of us moving into a space. Look at the right, at the very edge, see the doorknob? You don't really see the door, you just see the knob. And it's a glass door window opening out onto the terrace where a lunch or a breakfast has been laid under this cloud of light that's coming in. Notice the figure at the edge there, coming in with a plate perhaps. Underneath the shade of a palm, or is it a fir tree? It's a kind of unusual tree of some kind in this wonderful painting from 1946. Now, I wanted to get back to the notion of the interior as a space of control and the interior around a window. And this is something that Bonnard really exploits in his image, in many of his images of windows. I go back to the painting from the Phillips collection and I compare it with a painting from sort of a lithograph from sort of 20 years earlier, in which you see him playing with the idea of structure. And in the Phillips painting, with the rectangles of the stacked panes of glass of the open window, the striped lines of the wallpaper perhaps beneath, the square back of a chair at the far right, the blue back of the chair at the far at the far left, the pink back of the chair, the blue chair at the right. Note the cat playing with its mistress at the lower right-hand corner. And this notion of constructing a set of rectangular lines, whether they are very straight, as in the Phillips collection picture, almost as if they were drawn with a ruler, or crooked, as in the case of the painting from MoMA, where everything seems to curve as it rises up. And here in this extraordinary painting from a private collection in Dallas, of the open window in the sitting room upstairs in the house at Le Canet, we're going to get back to this in a minute, or this extraordinary view of the cupboard in the dining room below, in this painting from the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. Now, if we want to look for an artist who uses geometry in his compositions, we tend not to think about Bonnard. We tend to think about Mondrian. And we think of Bonnard as not particularly caring about composition because his paintings are so colorful. And we think they're all intuitive, that they just come out of his poetic soul. We, on the other hand, mischaracterize Mondrian as an artist who's almost mechanical, and who does not particularly care about the surfaces of his paintings. And we are wrong when we make that characterization. Because look at these two paintings, which could hardly be more different in many ways, but which have certain details that you could describe, you could make certain observations that could describe either painting. There is an extraordinary sensitivity to the way color behaves under light. Notice, it's easy to understand that in the case of the Bonnard. Notice in the Mondrian how the whites are different colors of white. It's not all the same white. There is an extraordinary attention to geometric detail. Look at the window, the diagonal of the screen going down over the window, the stripes, the rectangles in the Bonnard. Look at the way the horizontal and vertical lines on the left and bottom edges of the painting, the lines don't go to the edge of the canvas. It's very important when you see a Mondrian to see what happens at the edge, because Mondrian is calculating the distance between the way the two lines on either side of that yellow rectangle at the bottom right. Notice one goes farther towards the edge than the other. It's an absolutely minute calculation, and he will have cared about it a lot. And Bonnard is doing the same thing in his compositions. Bonnard gets a rap as the sort of death knell of Impressionism, but Bonnard should be understood as one of the most important artists of the modern movement. He was important to a lot of people, and painters again and again come back to Bonnard when they are talking about painters that they love. One of them is somebody that you might not suspect, Richard Diebenkorn, who's often compared to Matisse, but rarely to Bonnard. And yet he was in the Marines at Quantico Base in Virginia and went again and again to the Phillips collection, where of course he would have seen the painting at the left. And he carries that lesson in his head with him forever, all the way to the Ocean Park series. Now I want to touch on another related theme to the notion of the mirror, the window, and that is the mirror. We've talked about how the window is the framework for a view out onto the world. The mirror functions as a kind of window into another space that is almost magical. In the case of Bonnard, often what is in the mirror is not very real. It doesn't always match what's on the outside of the mirror, just like the reflection of the window doesn't match the window above it in the great bathing painting from Brussels. Looking into the mirror here, look how pale and white Marthe's body is in the mirror, looking like a piece of marble statuary, as opposed to the glowing, sort of warm and supple flesh that we see before us. Same thing here, where what we see in the mirror, though it's the same mirror, same wall, same dressing table, etc., is completely different than what is in the Brussels mirror. And the mirror has also changed its frame. It's the same mirror, but he simply hasn't painted the crossed edges, which you see here in yet another view of this same room, where everything, almost everything, is the mirror. All of the action in the painting is happening not in our space, but in this mirrored space that we look into as if through a window. Now, as we change from Normandy to the south of France, windows become more and more and more important in Bonnard's art. For in the house that he buys in Le Cannet in 1926 and moves into in 1927, there is an extraordinary number of windows, and he plays with them again and again, and they become very, very important, not simply as artistic motifs, but also as part of his life, part of the reality of living in this house. There it is with its little yellow roof just here. This is a big painting about 7 feet wide that we bought at the Kimbell a few years ago, and which was the impetus for my show of Bonnard's Worlds. Here's Bonnard, by the way, lower right-hand corner. And note the woman with her dog here, the distant mountains of the Esterel, the little town of Le Cannet below. Now this spot is completely surrounded by 6- and 7-story apartment buildings with apartments owned by Parisians who come down to the south of France for the sunshine. They've ruined it, of course. It was more beautiful in Bonnard's day, but we can't have everything. And here, I would show you a painting that has not only a mirror, window, but also a mirror. Because you see at the center the window door looking out past the orange balcony onto the landscape and the distant hills. At the right of that open door, you see what looks like another door, as if it's opening into a room in which somebody is seated off in the distance. Well, in fact, it is a mirror. And there you see it in the room as photographed by me in 2021. They had installed a bed in this room for the summer. It usually doesn't have a bed in it. It usually was just a sitting room with some kind of stiff chairs. There's hardly a piece of upholstered furniture in this whole house. It was always sort of dining chairs and nothing particularly comfortable. There was a statement of one of Bonnard's friends who said, "A certain degree of discomfort suits him." But once you have seen this mirror, then you get to understand what's happening here, where the dog is in fact in the mirror rather than in a space that we are, it's actually in our space, but we're only seeing him as reflected in the mirror, him or her. There it is again. This is the same room, same window, and here it is a third time. Same window, same mirror, same cast of characters, Marthe, and in the distance, Pierre, as seen in a window, as if he's seeing himself across her. All three of these were in Bonnard's Worlds, and it was one of the most beautiful walls in the exhibition to see them all side by side, and they're painted several years apart in between each one. If we go into this room, and we can look at the beautiful sort of yellow walls. It was painted a kind of beautiful, soft, sort of lemony yellow, and still is. We walk past the radiator and past this door, and we are in the bathroom. Light was terrifically important in Bonnard's bathing spaces, whether in an apartment in Paris. These are two apartments seen probably, this is almost 20 years separate these two paintings, one in 1908, the other in 1924, I think. You can see how light from a window is extraordinarily important in defining the space and the figure, and in falling onto the figure and illuminating the body of Marthe. In the bathroom in Le Canet, there were two very big windows, one a door that opened onto a balcony, and the other a standard window giving onto the Mediterranean Sea in the distance. It's a beautiful, very simple room. And people who told me, "Oh, you're going to see it, it's just very ordinary white," I said afterwards, it's not white at all. The tub is kind of white, but the walls are whitish, but many, many colors of white: yellow, blue, pink, lavender. And with these extraordinary windows opening into the room, we see it flooded with light, and that's what he plays with in paintings like these two, one in the Gulbenkian Foundation in Athens at the left and in the Museum of Modern Art at the right. One with the door closed, but the shutters wide open so that even though the door is closed, the light is coming through the upper half of the window. In the painting at the right, the doors are shut. The shutters are also shut, and that's the series of horizontal lines that you're seeing there are the louvers of the shutters outside. And he's also pulled the curtain halfway across the window. So the window is he's doing everything that he can to keep light from coming through it, and yet light is still piercing through and insisting on being present in the room. Because that light is all important for what happens in this room in terms of works of art. Without the daylight coming into this room through the windows, this room would not be the scene of magic that it becomes. It is a very beautiful space when you're in it, though, as I said, rather ordinary. It's less ordinary than it used to be when it had a linoleum floor rather than a tile floor. But it's the scene of the inspiration for an extraordinary group of paintings among Bonnard's very greatest, including this one, which is my favorite of them all, at the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris, the bathtub of 1936. So windows and light, whether in a painting or a lithograph, in the work of his friend Vuillard, windows and light and doorways are not only spaces of structure, there also can be spaces of reflection, and we've talked about mirrors, and here is Vuillard's painting of a room in the Louvre in which there is an extraordinary play of the reflections in the glass cases for the Greek pots and sculptures that you see on view, and in the background a mirrored door reflecting the window that is behind us as we stand and look into the space. And in fact, we see the houses on the other side of the Seine reflected here. And Bonnard can play this game too, and maybe plays it better than almost anybody else. And to talk about window and mirror, there is no better work than this one, which is incredibly hard to understand, and which I have heard many people get exactly wrong. So the key to the fact that the whole right-hand side of the painting is being seen directly, without reflection, and simply through a plate glass window, is the words that we're seeing here, which is petit poussé, which we're reading backwards because we're seeing them on the backside of the awning. We're under the awning and we're seeing the words that are facing the street, we're seeing them from the back. So we know we are looking through this window at something that is direct and directly observed. At the left, however, we know that there is no space that's going out into the street like this in this cafe. And so what we are looking at the left is the rest of the restaurant seen in a mirror in reflection. So the woman at the right is being seen from the back in her sort of wonderful sofa-sized chair, whereas the woman at the left is behind us and being seen in the mirror. In this extraordinary painting, which is on loan from the Musée d'Orsay to the museum in Besançon, where the man who commissioned it was from. It was commissioned, however, for his Paris apartment. So this complex game of looking and observing gets us to what the window and the mirror are really all about. And that is that they are about seeing. They are about sight and observation and looking. And to get there, we're going to move from the dining room in the country in Vernonay to the dining room in Le Canet, and here to the room in reality. Those are the two upholstered pieces of furniture. I guess I could count the chaise longue as also upholstered, but it's not a comfy house. But this room is extraordinary because it has two windows and a door opening onto the terrace outside the front of the house. Just an incredibly beautiful space in which Bonnard is sitting here, photographed by Cartier-Bresson, I think in 1945, a couple of years before his death. The most private space in this whole house is not the studio where he, in fact, let people come to see his paintings, but a little room upstairs, which was his bedroom dressing room, and in which there was a mirror, a sink, and a window. He only painted this window one time in this painting, and you can see how faithful it is to the construction of the window, which you see in photograph taken, in this case not by me, but by somebody else at the left. But one of the remarkable things about this mirror is the way in which it reflects the room. And that there is an image taken by me, and you see behind me that cabinet that you saw in the first picture of this room, which glows a kind of warm, yellowy white behind me, and is the yellow white that lies behind the boxer, one of his most beautiful and moving self-portraits. And here he is eschewing the window proper and using the mirror as the window in which he can look out on himself and look at himself, to observe and to see in eyes that are growing dimmer as time goes by, the process of his aging. And this is a painting painted in 1945, almost certainly showing us what the room looked like at night, where there's a light bulb glowing on his bald head and making the cupboard behind him even more luminous and yellow, and keeping his eyes in deep shadow. The window is about the seeing of things and the looking, and it is the metaphor for what Bonnard is really about, which is about looking, studying, and remembering, and making from this activity great, great works of art, of which you are the happy possessor of one of the greatest. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now stop, because the performance is going to begin any minute now, and we want to leave room for a couple of questions. There are microphones on either side of the room, and if you have a question, just raise your hand and they're going to pass you a mic, but don't start asking the question until you've got the microphone. Thank you.
I'm curious about World War II.
Yes.
And how that affected Bonnard.
Food was scarce, particularly meat. And Matisse, who is ensconced at the Hotel Regina in Nice, which is not very far away, 20 miles away or so, says, "Come and stay with me here. Check into the Regina." And Bonnard, who is living mostly alone at the time because Marthe has died, it says, no, it wouldn't suit me at all. It just really would not be I think he just really didn't want to fool with the people who were living at the Regina, and found his quiet better. But he says to Matisse, it's lucky, this is before Marthe dies, he says, it's lucky we're mostly vegetarian. Because the getting food and getting coal to burn in the boiler for those radiators, that was hard. Getting cigarettes was hard. He was an active smoker, and getting cigarettes in wartime was a hard thing to do. So there are certain creature comforts that it really that he didn't get. But he was far enough away from any action that he was not, and he was on the top of a hill in a sleepy little town, that even after the Germans came to the south of France, he was not much bothered. Matisse either.
Thanks so much. I was just wondering about the scale that he painted, because it's hard to tell. Our painting here is big.
Your painting is really big.
Yeah, and that other one you mentioned, that bigger landscape that was 7 feet, I think you said.
Yeah.
But they all feel like big, feels like it's right because they're all doors and surfaces and windows. But
They're not that big. They're not life size. Almost never. Yours is among the biggest paintings. It was certainly the biggest painting in my exhibition, except maybe for the Kimbell painting. It's probably about the same. Our painting is shorter and wider. Your painting is taller and narrower, closer to being square. I bet there's about the same square footage. But there are lots of small paintings in Bonnard's art too, or paintings that, looking at the Gauguin and I've forgotten what it is on the other side. Here in the photograph, lots of what we would call easel paintings, painted on a sort of normal size, 2 feet by 3 feet.
Yeah.
Let's say is a sort of standardy, more or less size. There are lots of variations on that. And he used those sizes of canvas, but he never painted on a stretched canvas. He always painted on loose canvas, which he tacked to the wall, and it allowed him the freedom to change the format of the picture if he wanted to make it shorter or wider. And there is one painting in particular that I am certain Bonnard intended to shorten, and has been stretched too big because it wasn't stretched until after he died. And I don't know that I'll ever convince the National Gallery of Art to
chop it
overframe
down.
the part that I think Bonnard intended for us not to see. But it's they also happen to put the Bonnard stamp on that part of the painting, so you'd be covering over what many people regard as the signature, though he never touched that signature at himself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great talk.
Thank
A couple
you.
questions on process now that you're talking about the paintings.
Yeah.
I had heard that he had put candy wrappers or little bits of candy wrappers on his walls to get a shimmer. That's one question, and how he used that. And the second question is, in translating to make these memory paintings, as you referred to them once at the beginning, he had this tiny sketches, and then he had the light in front of him, that he was seeing the vision from the window, through the window. I had heard that he had mixed up a color. If he mixed up a color, he worked on multiple paintings at once, and wherever that color landed. Could you talk a little bit about his process and about that?
So the first part of the question about things like candy wrappers, there's a famous wall in the studio, the one where you had the big yellow window, that studio in Le Canet. There's a wall there on which, as photographed by, Bressay, Cartier-Bresson, maybe Alexander Lieberman. There were reproductions of paintings by Monet, Picasso, Vermeer, Seurat rather, and then shiny colored paper, like candy wrappers, some of which was Japanese paper that he loved the way it was kind of gold or silver. And so he did, in fact, have those kind of tacked up onto the wall in that last studio. We don't have images, except the painting that you saw of the artist studio that I showed so much. We don't have a lot of images of his other studios across time. We don't have any photograph of the interior of the house in Vernonay, for instance, so we don't know really what they looked like and what he was doing earlier on in his career. In terms of color, and the multiple paintings at once, yes, there are great images of him standing on the floor beside that open window with the yellow bush beyond, with 3 or 4 paintings of different scales tacked up onto the wall at the same time. And indeed, the testimony, the evidence of people who were watching him says that he would be working on the yellows in all the paintings at the same time. And so that he had a palette, sometimes it was just a porcelain plate with some yellow squeezed onto it, and he would be sort of sampling from it and putting a little bit here and there, and then moving to the next painting and adding a bit. And he would work on paintings for months or sometimes years. The painting of the studio with the big yellow window was begun in the 1930s and not finished until the 1940s, and it was finished not in Le Canet, where it was begun, but in Fontainebleau, outside Paris, just in advance of an exhibition that his nephew organized. So he wasn't a painter who needed the motif to be with him to continue to work on the painting. He had it in his head. Great. Yes, thank you.